ध्यायेत् शारदचन्द्रसुन्दरमुखम् ताम्ररविन्देक्षणम् भक्ताभीष्टवराभयप्रदकरम् कौपीनमात्रोज्ज्वलम् स्वात्मानन्दरसानुभूतिविवशम् सर्वानवद्याङ्गकम् श्रीमन्तं श्रीरमणीश्वरं गुरुवरं योगासनाध्यासितं ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणीश्वरं ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणीश्वरम् ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणीश्वरम् हृदयकुहरमध्ये केवलं ब्रह्ममात्रम् यहमहमिति साक्षादात्मरूपेण भाति हृदि विषमनसा चिन्वता मज्जतव पवनचलनरोधात् आत्मनिष्ठो भवत्वम्। Namo Ramana. In this Tuesday Self-Enquiry session from Ramanacentre Center for Learning, Bangalore, we have been reading the reminiscences of Mahakrishna Swami from the book Years in the Presence of Ramana, My Master. It is being edited by Sri A.R. Natarajanji, our founder president. Mahakrishna Swami is sharing his reminiscences of his stay in Ramana Ashramam, and in the later years, he was blessed and guided by Bhagavan to open a Ramana Ashram in Brazil. So in his reminiscences, he is sharing the way Bhagavan would teach under the title Techniques of Teaching. And after reading this week's reminiscences, we will have a 20 minutes Atma Vichara session. Following that, our President Sarada Akka would be contemplating on Ramana Gita and basically on self-inquiry as it has been captured by Ganapati Muni, by him and his disciples' questions to Bhagavan and Bhagavan's answers as Sanskrit verses. Then finally, we will have the concluding prayers to Bhagavan. Mahakrishna Swami, talking about Bhagavan's techniques of teaching, he goes on to say, people spoke of the intense discipline which he performed, but this idea is as fanciful as that of the vow of silence. He never made an effort to become conscious of truth. There was no need. Since the experience he had in his youth, he was conscious of being the absolute truth and not the physical body, the mind, the senses. He lived naturally according to this consciousness. So he let himself be in calm places and remained meditating and devoting. He was one with the self, and nothing could perturb him. Children threw stones and made jokes about him, but Sri Ramana remained indifferent. He was not, however, unconscious of what went on, and for conscious of the divine is not a type of alienation. This A.R. Natarajanji highlights. I repeat, for the consciousness of the divine is not a type of alienation. The manifestation continued before his eyes, but he lived in a total assurance that only the self was real. And in this certainty resided his complete neutrality in relation to the world. This again, A.R. Natarajanji highlights complete neutrality in relation to the world. The world is only a dream, so why worry about it? It is better to live in the certainty that we are the Supreme Self. However, since he was incarnated, he had to live in this world, and the best way would be to function naturally integrated with it, without peculiar attitudes, seeking to be useful in some way. When Sri Ramana began to guide those who sought him, some people brought books and asked that he explain them. In the books, he found the route which he had followed naturally. It was a surprise for him to discover that what happened with him had happened to other beings as well. These experiences were registered and later served as an example. So the Sahajanishta, how a person in Sahajanishta would be, though often we read Bhagavan was in silence and he spoke very less and all of that and was in great discipline. But here Krishna Swami on his own account is saying like how his self is so natural with the entire manifestation. That is, if the waking state, many activities might be going on by the body, the mind, by the senses. The self is equipoised for all. It gives its light. It shines on all of this equally. Neither does it reject it, nor does it hold on to. And we see Bhagavan being the self, that he had no such silence and he was so natural. Mahakrishna Swami goes on to say that he was so natural, one with the self, there was no effort needed on his part. Then he goes on to say that whatever he had experienced in the childhood, that is when he was at the age of 16, that was the recognition of who he is. And that remained with him. And in that natural recognition of who he was very comfortable to deal with the entire manifestation, as how the self of all of us today, the one self of all of us, how it is in comfort with the whole of the manifestation. So was Bhagavan, he says. But the most important thing that he brings us to the attention is, we often take the question, who am I, as a way of inquiry, as a way of knowledge to know who we are. No doubt that is the right approach to take when we embark on the sadhana. But there comes a time by his abundant grace that the knowledge alone is not sufficient. To be identified with the truth as oneself is what Bhagavan is asking. So the who am I question, though it initially brings a lot of clarity to the intellect on who we really are, and further to the Anandamaya Kosha on how we need to stay with that truth. But the ultimate goal of who am I is to make all this wrong identity eventually dissolve in that truth. And in that truth, there is this sahaja vyavahara. In that truth, it is as it is, and no matter whether it's a waking, dream, or sleep, it continues to be undisturbed and be equipoised at all time. And so we see that the self self never gets perturbed, whether it is the waking, dream, or sleep. And we see that Bhagavan was in the same state. Children's, even if he threw stones on him and made all the things, though he was conscious, like the self is ever conscious, he was okay. He remained indifferent to all of them. And therefore, Natarajanji highlights, for the consciousness of the divine is not a type of alienation. Often we think that with Vairagya, we move away from the world and all. That is all perhaps a very good aid in the sadhana to make the mind one-pointed. But the ultimate goal is to identify ourselves with the divinity or with the self, and therefore there is no alienation. It is the one which has manifested also in whatever we are seeing. So there is no need to have a separate alienation that I am the self and this is all a separate manifestation. So Bhagavan Natarajanji highlights that here. Then he further goes on to say that there will be a sense of neutrality in relation to the world. So whatever may be coming and going in the world, events may be happening in the manifestation, the self will be equipoised at all time. So then further we see the world is only a dream. So why worry about it? It is better to live in the certainty that we are the self. This is the most important thing. Though all of the waking and the dream is nothing but the manifestation of the self, but it is always a transient thing. It is something that comes and goes. But what never comes and never goes is the Supreme Self. Therefore, the identity with that I am that unchanging self, is the most key thing with the enquiry, or the key thing which Bhagavan taught us and also revealed to us by his way of this earthly life. So Mahakrishna Swami is going on to bring those things, that he was so natural, integrated with everything, and had no peculiar attitudes. These peculiar attitudes are all when we are not in the consciousness. Sri Nachur Venkataraman Swami says very beautifully that we try to be in the conscience. The conscience has all this good, bad, right, wrong, lot of data. But the life of a Gnani is living in the consciousness, as the consciousness. So here also we see that Bhagavan had no peculiar attitudes towards things, that this is right, this is how I have to be, this is not how I am supposed to be, and all of that. He would be like a baby. It would be fine with a doll given to it, and the moment a doll is taken, the attention is taken to something else, it will be completely one with that. So we see that the self or the consciousness that we talk about has no peculiar attitude. It is only the rights and wrongs and the data that we hold on to that brings about all these peculiar attitudes in here. So what happens as we practice more and more of self-enquiry, the more and more it becomes very clear that all of these peculiar attitudes or this conscience-based living is not going to bring about any ananda. Every time what I think is good, if something does not go that way, then the mind becomes disturbed. So the more and more the clarity reveals that the ever-present self, which is very neutral, which is very equipoised no matter what is the external circumstances, and more it becomes clear that is what Bhagavan is asking us to identify ourselves with. not with this body, mind, intellect, or the ego complex that we think which is real, but it is not real. It happens only in the waking state. So the more and more we understand Bhagavan's teaching, more and more it becomes easy, or more and more it becomes clear that to remain in one's own natural state is the whole purpose of this sadhana. And it is not to understand the rights and wrongs and the do's and the don'ts and the knowing and the not knowing, none of it. That natural state which is ever present, which is what we are here and now, to remain as that, no matter whatever is the external circumstances, becomes the main purpose, and that is what Bhagavan is taking us by his abundant grace. We'll continue to read the next paragraph next week. So here we see in this paragraph how Mahakrishna Swami introduces us to Bhagavan's natural way of teaching, because the truth is also natural. It is present right now at this very moment. What is unnatural is all these thoughts and these ideas which are superimposed on that one single consciousness. And to take those ideas and concepts to be more important than the consciousness which lights it. So here, Bhagavan through his life was revealing to us that it is the self-knowledge or the self-abidance is not something very, very fancy thing. It is so natural, so much being ourselves here and now, and to let go all these, in fact, to let go all the fancy ideas and to be as we are, and with a very conscious recognition that that is what Bhagavan wants us to do, is what that was revealed by Bhagavan's very life and his very acts within the ashram. So we will, with Bhagavan's immense grace, with which alone we have come to this most direct path. The direct path, because it doesn't allow us to hold on to anything. It makes us to get back to our natural state. Until that, the enquiry will always make us doubt whatever may be the highest state of experiences that we may have. It makes us to question it, makes us to again see who is the one who experienced all of it. And by repeatedly making this, it makes the self-enquiry, makes us resolve in our own true nature. Until that, it continues to drive us, make us get in inner and inner into our own nature. Therefore, this is the most direct path that Bhagavan has blessed all of us with his abundant grace, with which alone we are all assembled here. Let us practice Atma Vichara for the next 20 minutes. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramana Namo Ramanakam.
Namo Ramana. Prostrations to Ramana, shining as the self in all beings. By the immense grace of the self manifest as Ramana, in this part of the satsang, we are meditating on the verses of Ramana Gita, which is a compilation by Ganapati Muni in 18 chapters of the questions posed to Bhagavan by himself and several other devotees, and the answers given by Bhagavan. He has couched it in Sanskrit verses and 18 chapters on lines similar to the Bhagavad Gita. We are now meditating on the 16th chapter, which is the chapter on Bhakti. And Bhagavan has started by saying that Bhakti is actually the uninterrupted flow of love towards the self. Love unbroken like a stream of oil is termed Bhakti. The self is dear to all, nothing else is dear. But then he says that the wise man understands that love and God are not different from oneself. Or rather, through the love, he understands that God and the self are not different from each other. And because of realizing this, the devotee merges in God. These are the first 3 verses. Then Bhagavan has gone on to say that even if there is no love for the self or desire for the self, if there is love for God, it will automatically lead one to the self. Because he has already said God and the self are non-different. Then he says, further he says, that supposing one does not have love for God in this manner, like the flow, an uninterrupted flow of the oil, what happens then? What if one prays to God only for a particular object, for deliverance from suffering? Okay, this is what Bhagavan is saying over here. He has told us, even if one is praying for deliverance from suffering, and this prayer is there continuously, ultimately, he says, only the Supreme is attained. Because Bhagavan says that even though one superimposes name and form on the Supreme, by constant remembrance of that name and form, one transcends the name and form. So Bhagavan is actually saying it is all right, even if we are not given to the Para Bhakti, even if one is in Apara Bhakti, the only worldly approach of wanting to get relief from one's sufferings, wanting to get relief or wanting to fulfill one's desires. If one turns to God even for these reasons, the ultimate goal will be realized gradually. Because ultimately what will happen, Bhagavan says, that it will merge into, it will transcend the name and form, and then it will merge into God, who is the very self. What our attention to God, for whatever reasons we may be paying attention to God. So Bhagavan had said over here, Vyapakam paramam vastu bhajate devata dhiya bhajanscha devata buddhya tadevante samashnute. Because that parama vastu, which is vyapakam, which is the supreme, which is the devata, if one prays to it, for what? Tada klesha nivrittaye. Verse 5 and 6, when read together, Parichinnam yadatmanam swalpajnam chapi manyate bhakto vishayi rupena tada klesha nivrittaye. So that fulfillment happens by the Supreme. And then Bhagavan has gone on to say, Devataya narashreshta nama rupa prakalpanat tabhyam tu nama rupabhyam nama rupe vijeshyati. One transcends or wins over the nama rupa ultimately, even though one prays to the Supreme as a nama and rupa. Jnanaya paripurnaya tada bhakti prakalpate dharabhyapetaya bhakti savichinneti kirtyate. Bhakti, when it is full, paripurnaya, then what happens? It confers knowledge, jnana. Then again here he says that it is the complete, like the stream of oil, which is uninterrupted. When devotion does not flow like that uninterrupted flow of oil, it is called intermittent devotion, says Bhagavan, which is Dhara vyapetaya bhakti savichinneti kirtyate bhakte parasya sahetuhu bhavatiti vinirnayaha. Even though the devotion is intermittent, it will ultimately lead to the continuous devotion. Because why, says Bhagavan, Kamaya bhaktim kurvana kamam prapyapya nirvritaha shashvataya sukhayante bhajate punarishwaram. And this is the secret, says Bhagavan, that when one goes to God, when one prays to God for the fulfillment of any desire, it may be the removal of affliction or the granting of any desire, then that desire will be fulfilled, necessarily fulfilled. That is implied over here in Bhagavan's answer. But what happens when the desire is fulfilled, says Bhagavan? When the desire is fulfilled, one does not stop loving God. On the other hand, one decides to go back to God for Shashvata Sukha. What happens is one desire gets fulfilled, then that fulfillment comes to an end, another desire arises, again one turns to God for fulfillment, that desire also gets fulfilled, then that also comes to an end, that sukha comes to an end, that joy comes to an end, then one has another desire, a third desire, a fourth desire. This rising of desires goes on and on and on, and God keeps fulfilling the desires. But Though God keeps fulfilling the desires, the joy which one gets from such fulfillment is transient. So what happens? Ultimately, one realizes that this joy is transient. We understand what Bhagavan says in Upadesha Saram, Kriti Mahodadhav Patana Karanam Phalam Ashashvatam Gati Nirodhakam. The fruit of karma is temporary, it is transient. Therefore, it only leads to more and more of action, more and more of desire. The fulfillment of desire does not bring us lasting joy. Then one wonders, what is the source of lasting joy? One turns to God as a source of lasting joy, says Bhagavan. Shashvataya sukhayante bhajate punarishwaram. Because God has fulfilled all the desires. God has given us so much of joy, but still we are not satisfied. Where does the answer lie? Oh, mighty one, I turn to you for that. So saying, we get back to God for God Himself. Get back to God for God Himself, which is the eternal happiness, says Bhagavan. So, faith in the Supreme begins and develops with the fulfillment of desire. So when desire and devotion coexist, doesn't matter, says Bhagavan. Bhakti kama sametapi kamaptau na nivartate shraddha vriddha parapumsi bhuya eva bhivardhate. It becomes the desire and devotion, even though they coexist. The fulfillment of desire becomes the source of the growth of Shraddha, the growth of faith in the Supreme. Bhagavan will give me whatever I desire. As we keep on thinking thus, then slowly we begin to understand what Sadhu Om Swami says. Do I really know what is good for me? Bhagavan has given me so many boons which I did not even ask for, says Bhagavan in Akshara Manamalai. Kedadalikum un kedil pugade kedu seyyadadu. You have given me boons even without me asking. So many boons we are giving without our asking. We think that we are given boons when we ask for them. We think that Bhagavan takes care of the fulfillment of our desire. But I often give a small example. Supposing one wants to get one's child admitted in a school, in a good school, and then one goes to that school, and then by Bhagavan's grace, one finds, oh, the admission has happened. Okay, but before one wanted admission in the school, Bhagavan has already established that school. Bhagavan has already trained all the teachers over there. So much of spade work has already been done. If I want to go to the shop and buy one commodity for myself, the shop is already available. If I want to go to the garden and pluck a flower, the flower is already there. The earth is already there. If I want to grow something in the earth, the fertility in the earth is already given by Bhagavan. So whatever we desire, Bhagavan has already done huge spade work before that. And when one looks at this, and how Bhagavan is taking care of our lives from moment to moment, far better than we can imagine, then what happens is our faith grows. Though it starts with desire, slowly we begin to understand, Bhagavan, you take care because you know better than me what is good for me. My vision is very, very limited. I know so little about myself, so little about the world. What am I to ask of you, saying this is what I want or this is good for me? And so often in life we see that we think we like something, and ultimately when we get it, we don't even want it. So it is far better to hold on to Bhagavan alone and allow him to take care of us. Thus, the bhakti grows. And when it reaches this point of surrender to Bhagavan, then what happens? Then the wandering of the mind will automatically disappear. It will get cut altogether. Why should the mind wander when Bhagavan is taking care of everything? Such great faith will come about. So Bhagavan says, thus devotion becomes complete in course of time. And by such complete devotion, one crosses the cycles of birth and death, just as one would do so through self-knowledge. That is how he concludes. Vardhamana cha sa bhakti kale purna bhavishyati purnaya paraya bhaktya jnane neva bhavam taret. The bhakti becomes complete, says Bhagavan. And when it becomes complete, one crosses over the cycle of births and deaths. The fruit of bhakti is no different than the fruit of jnana. But when Bhagavan talks to us about self-enquiry, he often says it is devotional self-enquiry. It is a self-enquiry which should have the devotion to the self-enquiry itself. Devotion and faith in the Guru who has given us this beautiful path of self-enquiry and devotion to the self, Atma-Rati. When that is there, then the self-enquiry actually comes to its fruition. So, Muruganar Swami also says that bhakti and jnana are like two wings of a bird. The bird requires both the wings to fly. So, bhakti must support our self-enquiry. And self-enquiry, in turn, gives us real bhakti. This Taila Dharavat, which Bhagavan is telling, the flow, the uninterrupted flow of devotion can happen when one practices self-enquiry and realizes actually through experience that one is nothing actually. What is there? Where is this I? What is this I? There is naiva manasam, there is nothing to call I. Then where is the question of my holding on to myself? Only the Supreme exists. Such spontaneous love for the Supreme wells up in one who does self-enquiry. But if Bhagavan says it's all right, if we have desires for anything in the world also, it's okay. If one has desires for freedom from afflictions, then also it's okay. And what is the greatest desire for freedom from affliction? It is to turn within through self-enquiry. Why do we turn within through self-enquiry? It is for freedom from the affliction called identity, false identity. To get rid of this great affliction, we turn within through self-enquiry, depending on that supreme force, Ramana, to reveal the self to us. So depending on the self itself to reveal itself to us. So in this way, bhakti and jnana are actually two aspects of the same coin, or again to say what Muruganar Swami says, two wings of the same bird that takes us into the kingdom of the self.
Om Namo Bhagavate Sri. Apar Satchit Sukhavarigashe Yasyor Mimatram Bhuvanam Samastam Guhahitam Tam Brahmanam Kabhiram Chinta Vihina Hrudi Chintayami Chinta Vihinam Hrudi Chintayami Thank you.